All right, now it's on. Now it should be on.
Now it's on.
Yeah.
I'll still
Hi,
use
everyone.
my stage.
Would you like to join us a little closer so it feels a little bit more intimate? You're so far away. Feel free to come a little closer if you feel comfortable. My name is Alejandro Hernandez-Valdez, and I'm the Artistic Director of Musica Viva NY. And I'm here with my good colleague, Trent Johnson, who you all know very well. He's our organist and assistant music director. And we have two very special guests. Samantha Tramontano is a New York City-based geologist, specializing in volcanoes at the City University of New York. Her current research examines rocks and crystals with an aim to demystify the awakening of the Momotombo volcano in Nicaragua and La Palma in the Canary Islands. With studies at the University of Canterbury, New Zealand, the Eastman School of Music, and a Master's of Science from Vanderbilt University, she is now a PhD candidate and lecturer at CUNY, the Graduate Center, Queens College at the College of Staten Island. Samantha draws on her experiences growing up and playing saxophone in New York City to foster the inclusion of creativity in her scientific practices, and is grateful to be part of an event that celebrates two of her life's passion. Welcome, Samantha.
Thank you.
Gilda Lyons is a composer, vocalist, and a visual artist who combines elements of Renaissance, Neo-Baroque, spectral, folk, and extended vocalism to create works of uncompromising emotional honesty and melodic beauty. Lyons currently serves as co-chair of the composition program at Wintergreen Music Academy and as assistant professor of composition at the Hart School. She is the executive director of the Richard Garmay Chamber Music Series, concerts. Lyons served as opera in the 2019 season. In 2021, she returns as composition faculty for Connecticut Summer Fest. Welcome, Gilda.
Thank you.
So we're very excited about this. This is going to be a very special concert because we're focusing on Mother Earth and all the things that we could do better to keep it in better shape. Now, your piece is based on a volcano in Nicaragua. Can you tell us a little bit about that volcano and your experience with that piece of nature and how it influenced your composition?
Absolutely. So my mother is from Nicaragua, and I will lead with the fact that my mama is here today. So this is very exciting for me to get to share this premiere with her. It's been a couple of years since we've been doing live premieres in person. And Momotombo is certainly, it's not the biggest volcano in Nicaragua, but it is one of the most legendary. It's one of the most famous, well-known. And in person, I've spent more time at the Masaya volcano, but Momotombo still is so resonant for me, and it destroyed the city of León in 1610. You probably know better than me about
Around
that.
then,
Around that.
Yeah.
And it has this incredible folk legend that. So I was talking to my mom about the names of the volcanoes, and some of them are much closer to the Nahua language, and a lot of them are the Christian names of saints, like the San Cristobal, but Momotombo, it becomes from the fact that people the monks used to baptize the volcanoes, but Momotombo, the friars went up to baptize, and they never came back. And Momotombo keeps its indigenous name, but I feel closest to Momotombo because of Rubén Darío, who is he's the poet that I think as Nicaraguan it feels like we're I don't want to say we're proudest of him of all of our artists, but he's certainly one of there's no one more loved, I'll say that, than Rubén Darío. And he has this powerful poem about Momotombo. And after our initial conversation, where Alejandro was incredibly generous about how I might approach this collaboration, and really there was an openness. I knew that nature was a central concern for you, and we have, in different ways, certainly very different ways, but a shared experience with Spanish language text. And so I went to Darío, and I went to Momotombo, and I stayed there for so many reasons, and then this piece that you'll hear today came from that.
That's great. And Samantha, you're an expert on Momotombo. Can you tell us about your research on that particular volcano?
Yeah, absolutely. So my research mostly works with, or I sample ash and lava from eruptions that have happened in the past. And so while my particular focus is on the 2015-2016 eruption, we look at ash and lava and tephra and compare what came out during this most recent eruption to what had occurred in the past. And so a big goal of our research and our work there, and this, and I'm speaking of like my whole lab group, right? This is a group effort not only with my advisor, Professor Marc-Antoine Longpré, but with Unitarian, the Geological Survey of Nicaragua, and the private power plant. There's a geothermal power plant right on the flanks, just 3 kilometers south of the equator, or not the equator, the crater of the volcano. And so we're all seeking to better understand what happens just prior to an eruption, what signals can we observe at the surface, so that we have a better understanding of, when it might happen in the future, and inform forecasting models for future eruptions. So I look at crystals, and they archive and tell the story. In the same way that tree rings record, the growth and history of a tree, crystals record the growth and history of magma bodies underneath volcanoes. And so they change over time. They can and cannot be predictable. There's some things that we can look for in signals. So the more we research and work with these products that come out, the better we can understand what might come in the future. Yeah.
It's interesting. I'm certainly not an expert on volcanoes, but 2 months ago, I finally got to go out to the great northwest of the United States and see Mount St. Helens for the first time. And it was the most incredible sight. This is, of course, post-eruption. And one of the things that really, besides just the actual sight of this, monstrosity, was to realize the incredible power that's behind eruptions, and that is sort of like this kinetic energy that's stored and just ready to be, sent forth. So just the sight of the volcano, and even a volcano like Momotombo, I was looking at pictures, and you see the steam rising. It's that potential energy, of what's possible.
And for the people that live in your story, in your piece, that live near the volcano is everything. It's a god of sorts. It's a center of power. It's so many things. I can tell you that's the case because my father was born in a little town called Tuxpan in Mexico, very small town, right on the skirt of a volcano, the volcano in Colima, and it's an active volcano. And they had a huge earthquake because of an eruption of a volcano in 1945, and a quarter of the town, was destroyed, and everything, all the stories, all the folk stories, all the music, everything they do in that town centers around that volcano. So really, it's a big part of their life. Can you tell us a little bit about Momotombo and the experiences that perhaps your mother must have had about the volcano?
Well, certainly the destruction of the original León in the 1600s is central to the conversation. It's this legend, and I think for in terms of my journey, I have been to I like I said, my personal experience is much more with the volcano of Masaya, because that's the one that many times in my life I've gone and I've walked and breathed, because that's a primary experience for me, is the fumes. I can't imagine all of the work that you must have done, that just this taking this in, but it's in you. You're not just witnessing it, but you're of it, because the air it's not sulfur, it's almost like ammonia. Is that crazy? Is that a thing?
Yeah, well, when the sulfur, it's like there are chemical reactions that occur in the atmosphere when gases from the magma come out. And so there's all these interactions, and so you get kind of this mixed chemically.
Yeah. Okay, good. So I'm totally on it.
You are. No, you're there. Trust the nose.
What about rhythm and the rhythm of a volcano? I think of volcanoes as something that has rhythm. Can you tell us anything about that?
Oh, yeah, I would love to talk about that because we talk about different time scales in our work, whether it's the rhythm over centuries or the rhythm over thousands of years or the rhythm over a day, right? So Momotombo has these kind of like degassing episodes where it like puffs mostly water vapor, right? And sometimes it's on or sometimes it's off, but for people that live really closely to a volcano, you can feel sort of in tune to this breath, right? And I didn't really get a chance to experience that until I had an experience with an active eruption. This wasn't in Nicaragua, but most recently in La Palma in Spain. So that was a current volcanic eruption of this year that I had like a really amazing opportunity to go and study. And yeah, it took after that first week of like adrenaline and getting used to seeing a near constantly erupting volcano, but it's like it's the sound that changes. It's like low roaring, right? And then, you know, fluxing and of gases and smells and where the wind goes. It's all I think it's beautiful. And but we study it. Like we map out time series and we look for patterns in these signals over the day scale, over the month scale, the year scale, so that we can hope to pick out patterns, right? That's where we're getting at. Yeah.
I think too, you're putting your finger on something that animates this idea of rhythm, this idea of breath and life, because for me, the Momotombo is seen as this eternal. Like it's interesting. You asked about like what are some specific, but it's more like no, it's the opposite. It's just eternal, right? It's this eternal presence. You know, I mean, it's like, it's just, my tío lived for, and tía lived for a long time in Chinandega, so that's north of León. And so you're always looking at the volcanoes when you take a road trip, because the road trips are usually long and there's usually a few volcanoes in there. But it's always, Momotombo is this eternal. And that's what was so beautiful to me about the Darío, is that he's on a train and he's 15 years old, and it's that ephemeral moment in a life where he says, I was 15, I had a star in my hand, right? That moment of you realize self and you realize potential, you're coming into your power, but you don't know what it means yet. And there's this Momotombo that is epic and forever, right? But why that, and why I don't feel that when I look at the beautiful mountains near us in upstate New York. I don't feel that, and that's because with Momotombo and any volcano, you watch it breathe. So you've kind of anthropomorphized this thing, and also I think it's so symbolic. It's tied to culture in its own unique way.
I have a question for you. Maybe this is a composer's question. And hopefully it's not hard to answer, but it's this sort of mysterious thing about composition. And how do you turn an idea like a volcano? How do you turn a poem? How do you turn that into sound? Well, I mean, you don't have to go through some detailed process, but what kinds of things happen in your brain that the imagery creates sound?
Oh, that's a fun question. And I love that I can't answer it. I started really with the rhythms for this, and you'll hear when the piece that Alejandro will be premiering starts, you're going to hear rhythms that aren't sung, they're percussive. And that was one of the first questions I had, you know, because he was very generous. Maestro wrote to me, just making sure you don't have anything you need to check in about. Yeah, actually. Is everybody okay with that? Because sometimes vocalists prefer to just sing, and that's understandable. But I had a sense that this was a little bit more wide open, and it certainly is. But I started with rhythms, and I think partly because we're on that train, and the train is the thing that, to me, for me, I go to live in metaphor, and the metaphor is always linked to color, and color is sound. Because all my formal training was as a visual artist until I got to college. I couldn't read music when I got there. So it's all, what's it called again? When you hear color? Synesthesia. Yeah, that's where I mean that's the I also
Like
can't tell my
Scriabin,
left
right?
from
Scriabin could do that.
yeah, and Mozart just always if it needed to be bright yellow, it was E major, right? And but that's that for me, image and color and sound are. I even made the mistake just saying it. They're all fused together, so it's how I experience. And if it's the metaphor that I need to lock into. Like once I've got that, I hear the sounds.
There are some moments in your piece that are so mystical, and I wonder if you know, Samantha, of any traditions or any cultures that connect to that mysticism of volcanoes, how they mystify volcanoes and how they they turn them into something beyond just a big mountain.
Such a great question, and also one that I can't quite answer, right? Because they are not of my culture. So while I'm sure we've all heard of legends of these gods in Hawaii that live in the volcanoes. My family were immigrants from Italy, so we had connections to both Vesuvius and Etna, right? And so I think while it's kind of preserved in the body, right? This is like definitely not coming from a scientific, like this is my personal experience, right? Right, that's where it lands for me, right? It is a fully immersive sound imagery, like beyond science, like strict observation, right? When there's emotions, when you see a volcano, right? Like that is separate, right? So, but I think that's important to recognize even in scientific work, because that's when creative approaches come up and come together, right? When you're working with people that are around. But no, I cannot speak on like specific gods or
Do you have any other questions?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. When you receive a brand new piece of music that you're going to perform, sometimes you never know what you're going to get. So it could be anything.
Pretty much all the time.
Yes.
It's scary.
Yes.
And that's why, I mean, for me, the
know?
huge round of applause goes to you for commissioning and being willing to dive in, sight unseen. That's the nature of a commission. You have no idea.
Yeah, and it's interesting how you begin to learn a piece and you begin to learn about it, and that process of sort of becoming that piece, so that when you perform it, it becomes you're the essence of the text, you're the essence of the musicality, and that's a great process. And even just this past week, I was reading the text, at least the text that I could translate, and it was just interesting how the text really makes that music come alive, and the music makes the text come alive, and especially the movement about going to baptize the mountains, and they never heard from again. It's like, wow, this magnificent mountain. It's who knows what happened. It's all mysterious. So that process of digesting a brand new piece of music, and then coming to adore it because you spent so much time with it, and you able to understand it deeply. It's fantastic. So thank you for
thanks for
what
the
you've created.
investment, because that's the hope, is that it's not about a real collaboration. Is exactly that. It's not, okay, I'm going to do a thing and now you're going to recreate the thing, and humanity is divorced from the process. This is the opposite of that. This is about the humanity. It's about, I have a sense of the kinds of ways that you work. It's that open, right? And that then I'm feeling my way forward toward that, and using the generosity that I sense to conjure a piece that then you will do a trust fall into. It's all very, very spiritual, as you said. It really is a very human process. And I love the way that you've responded to text, because I think it's very different from the way that I perceived art song or choral works usually being structured. That's something that getting in there and using the text and the research to create a new story which isn't just one thing or a collection of things, but a new thing from elements is something that I'm.
Are some of those rhythms in the piece, are they Nicaraguan? Are they Gilda? Are they just from who knows where?
This is in almost every piece that I've ever written. And that's we call it the pat in my house for my little boys, right? Because that's the rhythm that my mother patted me to sleep by, and it's the rhythm that we dance and when we were with family, and it's just central, and so it's the heartbeat and its truth and its vulnerability, and so yeah, there's no question that's somewhere in there.
Going back to the text, how did you put the text together? Because you have several perspectives there, Rubén Darío and some of the contemporary writers, the conquest, during the time of the conquest. So how do you put it all together for this composition?
So one of the things I can tell you about process is that I often take longer to research than I do to write. And that's because the research is the writing, and it's here, and then it's time to write it on the page. And so with Momotombo, it's a really long poem. You'll probably be seeing maybe 1/20th of what's actually in the full poem of Momotombo. But I found fascinating that Momotombo has, like you commonly see, a quote right under the title, and the quote that Darío has is Victor Hugo. And it's "Au vieux Momotombo colosse chauvenu," right? So it's a French quote in this Spanish language text, and then he references the monks, the purple catastrophes, he says. And I took it to my mom because I was like, "What am I missing, Mom? Can you help me with this? I know I must just not be translating it right." And she's like, "No, I don't know what that." So what I did was I followed the research. I did the research on the things that Darío was reading about. And so he's clearly referencing some writings of Oviedo. He's referencing quite literally the Victor Hugo. He's referencing Squeer, who was one of the people that was coming and doing a survey of the land, right? And I felt that it was important to, we had a conversation about the fact that it's problematic that here Darío, who is the essential Nicaraguan artist, he's had to look to European sources to get any kind of written history of his own country. And so I had to include Bartolomé de las Casas because he was such an advocate for the indigenous peoples that it felt correct to, and that's where the heart of the piece opens up, and where I get shivers.
It's wonderful. Samantha, anything else that you'd like to tell us about Momotombo?
Well, now that you're just bringing up, we use the same texts in learning about.
Oh, fascinating.
Yeah, like prior history and recorded history, and so during the conquests, right? Shakes were recorded, right, which became important for us to know if they were related to potentially the 1610 eruption that destroyed León Viejo. But yeah, we continue to go through those in all of our work at every volcano, because it's not always. I have this saying for my students. I say everyone's a scientist, everyone's an athlete, and everyone's an artist. So depending on the hat you wear that day. And so, because I teach a lot of non-majors in Geology 101, right? And so a lot of them are, art majors or music majors, and they come in having to do this course to fulfill their major. But I try to bring as much of what they know and how they think into the class. And so some of that is like from history texts, some of it is from a creative background and applying and looking and interpreting patterns we visually see in the rocks. So it's so interesting to see that one text can influence and take shape so many different ways. But
and you went to Eastman, right?
I studied there. Well, I did my undergraduate at the University of Rochester, but I studied under the saxophone program at Eastman because they had a partnership, right?
Fantastic.
So I started as a music major during my undergraduate. I was going to do more of audio engineering, as my major because I had interests in the sciences. And then I went on one trip to the west coast of the U.S., which is a much more active, there's an literal active plate boundary along the whole west coast of the Americas, except for some parts of California. But it was a very, very influential experience for me that made me just be like, oh, like, you can do this? Like, you could just, I don't know. I grew up in Staten Island. I did not think that, like, being a geologist was, like, a thing you could do.
Is there any overlap between music and what you do as a scientist?
Creativity, yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I try to advocate for that as much as possible in my teaching and in my work, right? So none of my work is of one discipline. So I think moving forward in the sciences, it's really important that we include non-academic scientists, right? Like just observers, people who look at these volcanoes, right? Have a wealth of knowledge, but communicate it differently. And so whether that's through music or through text, right? I think that's where we need to go to learn and deepen our knowledge of the planet. So,
Thank you.
Quick question for Samantha. What's it like to actually be like on the slope of a live volcano? I mean, you know it could blow at any moment, or maybe it won't, but I mean, what's it like it's like living and breathing underneath of you. What is it like? Is it scary?
Well, Momotombo is beautiful. Like, it's truly like this picture perfect, like textbook triangle. And you can walk. We had the opportunity to go out with workers from the geothermal power plant, and they know these old flows and they kind of overlap one another. And so as you walk over these really sharp rocks, like your shoes get destroyed, right? It's like you get cuts on your arms. It's like a very like give and take, right? Which I think is really beautiful of an experience, right? But it feels alive. It feels alive. And I don't know, I am calmed by it. And I know that if there is shaking, right, then that's when you move quickly.
Watch for the rocks falling.
There's usually, not always, right? And there's a lot of volcanoes that will erupt with no warning, right? But Momotombo is one that has given us seismic signals of at least 3 years before erupting. So before 2015, there was shaking in 2013 or so. But yeah.
So interesting. Thank you both so much, and thank you, Trent.
Thank you.
Now we're going to enjoy your beautiful piece in
I
a few
can't wait.
minutes. Yeah,
I
we
can't
can
wait.
wait either. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Hey, so good to meet you.
Yeah.